Welcome to Storytelling and Beyond, the channel where powerful emotions, deep truths, and gripping stories come to life. Subscribe and join us on unforgettable journeys. Ryan stood at the edge of the military base gate, duffel bag over his shoulder, as the golden hues of sunset bathed his figure. 2 long years overseas had left their marks on his spirit, his body, and his hopes. Every night during his deployment, he had clung to the image of home, his wife Julia's laughter echoing through their small living room, the baby boy he'd barely held before leaving, their future as a family. The taxi ride from the base to his suburban neighborhood felt like a dream. He watched the streets blur past, heart thudding louder with every turn. Thoughts raced: how much the baby must have grown, how Julia would react seeing him early, unannounced. He smiled imagining her joyful tears, the warmth of her hug, the 3 of them finally together again. As the car pulled into the driveway, that smile faded slightly. The lawn was unkempt. A child's toy was scattered on the steps, not theirs. And a sleek black SUV, one he didn't recognize, was parked crookedly in front of the garage. Brushing off his unease, Ryan paid the driver, took a deep breath, and approached the front door. He inserted the key gently, but it didn't fit right. He tried again, twisting with more pressure. The lock had been changed. Confused, he rang the doorbell. Several long seconds passed before Julia opened the door, wearing a silk robe and a shocked expression that quickly soured. "Ryan? What, why didn't you tell me you were coming home?" she stammered. "I wanted to surprise you," he replied, scanning her face. No tears. No hug. No smile. Behind her, the house looked different: new furniture, a man's jacket hanging on the back of the couch, cologne lingering in the air. A child's voice called out, "Mommy, who's that?" Ryan's heart surged. He knelt down, arms wide open as the little boy peeked from behind the couch. But the child didn't run to him. Instead, he turned back and called, "Uncle Rob, someone's here." Ryan froze. His stomach turned. "Uncle Rob," he repeated quietly, looking up at Julia. She looked cornered, like a wild animal with nowhere to run. "He's just a friend, Ryan. You weren't here." "I was lonely. I was fighting for this country," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. "For you. For our son." She looked away. The boy came closer. His face, it didn't look like Ryan's. The dark hair, the eyes, none of it matched. A cold realization crept in, wrapping its fingers around Ryan's heart. Could it be? Before he could ask more, a tall man in gym shorts and a tight shirt walked into the living room, towel draped over his shoulder. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Ryan. "Who the hell are you?" the man asked casually. Ryan stood tall. "Her husband." Julia gasped, stepping between them. "Please, not now. Let's talk." Ryan didn't hear the rest. His heart pounded in his ears. The betrayal was slicing through him like shrapnel. He turned slowly and walked back to the taxi stand, eyes burning, fists clenched. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Subscribe to Storytelling and Beyond for more deeply emotional and powerful narratives that resonate with your heart. After a sleepless night filled with betrayal and disbelief, Jake woke up on the worn-out couch in his friend Matt's garage. The silence of the early morning buzzed in his ears as he stared at the ceiling, numb. Just yesterday, he had returned home from deployment, expecting a warm welcome, a tight embrace from his wife Clara, and the smiling face of the boy he thought was his son. Instead, he'd walked into a nightmare: Clara cheating with a man he barely knew and the devastating truth that little Benny wasn't his biological child. He rubbed his face, the emotional weight pressing down on his chest like armor he couldn't remove. His mind flashed with memories: how he had worked extra missions, slept in barracks full of dust and danger, also Clara and Benny could live comfortably. He remembered the long nights he'd spent on video calls, listening to Benny's giggles and Clara's whispered "I love you." Now, those words felt like poison. Matt entered the garage with 2 mugs of coffee, breaking the quiet. "You sure you don't want to just cool off for a few days before making any big decisions?" he asked gently. Jake took the mug, eyes distant. "There's nothing to decide, Matt. I saw it. Heard it. They both admitted it. His voice was flat, like a soldier giving a report. She lied to me for 5 years. About everything. Matt sighed and sat across from him. You going back today? Jake nodded slowly. Yeah. I need to get my stuff. And I need to look her in the eye and let her know this ends now. Later that afternoon, Jake drove back to his home, a house that now felt like a stranger's place. As he stepped out of the truck, neighbors peeked through curtains, sensing the storm that followed him. Clara was in the driveway, looking like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes were puffy red. She stepped forward, hands out. Jake, please, can we just talk? He stared at her, emotionless. You talked enough behind my back. I never meant for this to happen. It got out of control. Is Benny even his name? Or is that a lie too? Jake snapped, voice sharp. Clara flinched. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jake walked past her, into the house. The scent inside was the same: lavender candles, coffee in the kitchen, but it felt different now. Like everything had been tainted. He moved quickly, packing his duffel bag, grabbing the things that were truly his. Pictures, medals, the old leather-bound journal from his dad. As he came back out, Clara was still there. He doesn't know, she whispered. Benny still thinks you're his dad. Jake paused, heart-twisting. I was his dad. I still love that boy. But you made sure I couldn't trust what we had. He opened the truck and looked at her one last time. I'm not just leaving you. I'm taking back my life. Everything else you can keep. Including the lies. And with that, he drove off, leaving behind a home that had become a battlefield of betrayal. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees as Jake drove toward the edge of town. He needed air. He needed clarity. Every turn of the road seemed to echo with Clara's lies and the sound of a child's laughter that wasn't really his. Benny. The boy who called him dad for 5 years. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he replayed old birthday parties, Christmas mornings, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. All of it, built on a foundation of deceit. He stopped at an overlook just past a ridge, the same one he used to visit before deployments. A place where the world felt still, where he could think. Jake stepped out, feeling the breeze against his skin like a reminder that he was free now, even if that freedom came with heartbreak. He sat on the hood of his truck, staring out across the valley, the sky slowly catching fire with sunset colors. A knock on the side window pulled him from his thoughts. He turned, surprised to see an old friend from high school, Tina. She'd once been the girl with sketchbooks full of dreams, who left town after graduation to chase a life in the city. But here she was, holding a small gas can and smiling sheepishly. Ran out of gas, she said with a soft laugh. Of all places, right? Jake smiled faintly and hopped down. Lucky this spot's got decent karma. They talked for a while as Jake helped siphon a bit of gas into her car from a backup container he always kept in the bed of his truck. Small talk turned into deeper conversation. He told her about the betrayal, about Clara, about Benny. Tina didn't flinch or judge. She just listened, quietly, with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. I know what it's like, she finally said. To give everything to someone and have it thrown back like it meant nothing. I went through something like that in Boston. Took me years to even say it out loud. Jake looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a reflection of his pain in her eyes. That silent, hollow ache that only someone who's been broken could recognize in another. Tina gestured to the overlook. This place helped me too. I used to come here with my dad. After he passed, I came alone. To remind myself that endings aren't always the end. They sat for a while in the golden silence, the weight of their lives suspended for a moment. Eventually, Tina stood, brushing off her jeans. Well, I better get going before it gets dark. But hey, she reached into her car and pulled out a worn notebook. If you ever need to talk, or if you want to write it out, here. It helped me. Jake took the notebook, unsure of what to say. For the first time in days, something like hope flickered behind his tired eyes. "Thanks, Tina." "Really?" She smiled and walked back to her car, giving a small wave as she pulled away. Jake stayed a few minutes longer, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the hills. Maybe life had gutted him. Maybe his heart had been shattered. But in that quiet, on that ridge, he realized he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to rebuild, not for Clara, not even for Benny, but for himself. Jake returned home the next day, the house eerily quiet now. Clara and the child were gone, their absence almost as loud as their presence once was. Boxes half-packed remained, as if she had left in haste, or perhaps hoping he'd change his mind. But Jake felt no second-guessing in his chest. Just a slow, steady ache, like a wound that had finally been stitched, but still throbbed with the memory of pain. He walked through the living room, past the shattered picture frame he hadn't yet picked up. A photo of the three of them, Benny grinning, Clara holding his hand like nothing could touch them. Jake took a deep breath and began picking up the glass, piece by piece. Each shard felt like a piece of his broken trust, now being cleaned away with quiet determination. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on the door. He opened it to find a woman in her 50s, dressed in a business suit and holding a briefcase. "Mr. Jacobs?" she asked. "That's me. I'm Linda Raines. I'm a private investigator. I was hired by your late father." Jake blinked, surprised. "My father passed 2 years ago." "I know," she said gently. "But he suspected something off about your marriage. He didn't share details, just asked me to look into Clara discreetly. He told me to come to you only if something ever came to light." Jake stepped aside to let her in, still stunned. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, photographs, phone records, financial statements. Proof. Clara had been lying for a long time. The affair, the secret bank account, a second phone. All of it confirmed. Jake sat down slowly, his eyes scanning the pages. "He tried to protect me," he said under his breath. "Yes," Linda replied. "And he also left you something else." She handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter in his father's handwriting. "Jake, I know you're a soldier. I know you're strong. But even warriors fall. If you're reading this, then truth found you, and I hope it brought you clarity, not just pain. I always believed in your strength, but I also knew that the strongest thing a man can do is start over when life breaks him. Use the land. Use the house. Build something new. Something that's yours, asterisk." There were tears in Jake's eyes by the time he finished. He hadn't cried in years, not even at the funeral. But now, his father's words cracked something open. Jake stood and walked to the old safe in the garage, punching in the code he hadn't used in months. Inside were the deed papers to a remote piece of property left to him. A lakeside cabin in the forest. Untouched. Waiting. Jake packed a few things. He called his boss and took leave. It was time. As he drove out of town, the buildings gave way to open fields and winding roads. The pain didn't vanish, but with every mile, it felt lighter. At the cabin, the scent of pine and lake water wrapped around him like a promise. He opened the door and stepped inside. It was dusty, but solid. Like the kind of life he wanted now. Quiet. Real. Honest. He sat down on the wooden steps out front, watching the sun dip behind the trees, just like on that overlook. And he thought maybe the past had burned to ash. But ash could be fertile. It could grow things, if you let it. Jake took a deep breath. Tomorrow, he'd start rebuilding. Jake spent the next several weeks at the cabin, embracing solitude like an old friend. He woke at dawn to the sound of birdsong and the wind brushing through the tall pines. The quiet, once haunting, had become his sanctuary. He chopped wood, mended the creaking dock, and fixed up the small cabin room by room. Each nail he hammered felt like a stitch in the fabric of a new life, his life. No more shadows of betrayal. No more pretending. Just raw honesty between him and the wilderness. But healing doesn't happen in straight lines. Some nights he still woke up in a cold sweat, remembering Clara's tearful eyes as he closed the door on her. Sometimes he'd stare at the lake for hours, wondering if Benny, though not his by blood, would remember the man who taught him to ride a bike or how to cast a fishing line. Regret came and went, like waves. But unlike before, it no longer pulled him under. One afternoon, while walking the trail behind the cabin, Jake came across a stray dog, all ribs and matted fur. It growled weakly, limping, eyes wary. Jake crouched and tossed a piece of jerky from his pocket. "Yeah, I know the feeling," he said softly. Over the next few days, the dog lingered closer and closer, until it finally let Jake tend its wounds and offer shelter. He named her Scout. In her, Jake found something unexpected: companionship. A second chance for trust, for loyalty, uncomplicated and pure. The weeks turned to months. Jake started writing again, something he'd abandoned years ago in the rush of military life and the chaos of betrayal. His journal filled with memories, reflections, and even forgiveness, slow, reluctant forgiveness, not just for Clara, but for himself. He realized he'd carried blame that was never his to hold. Then one day, a letter arrived. It was from Clara. She apologized. Not just for the affair, but for the confusion, the betrayal, the damage to Jake's soul. She told him she and Benny had moved to another state. She didn't ask for anything. Just wanted him to know Benny still asked about his soldier dad. And that if Jake ever wanted to write back, no pressure, she'd welcome it. Jake sat with that letter for days. Then one evening, under the golden light of a fading sun, he picked up a pen. He didn't know what the future held. He wasn't sure if he'd ever see Benny again. But he knew he had survived. He had learned how to stand tall again. Not as a soldier, not as a husband, but as a man who'd been broken, and who chose to rebuild anyway. As Scout laid her head on his feet and the stars blinked into view, Jake looked around at the life he'd carved out of ruins. This wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning. Thanks for watching this emotional journey on Storytelling and Beyond. If Jake's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful life tales that touch the heart. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story that inspires, heals, and uplifts. See you in the next one.